Well, welcome, Kari. I am so excited for you to share your story with our listeners today. And this is going to be a great conversation. It's funny how your story and mine have so many similarities. And I'm
Yes.
passionate about my journey to help using that to help others just like you are. So we have a lot to talk about. So let's dive in. And if you would first just tell us a little bit about your family.
Sure. So it's just my husband, John, and my son, Brady, who is almost 14, and me and a dysfunctional hound dog named Princess Leia because
Oh,
my son
gosh.
loves Star Wars. We had Brady later in life. I was almost 40 when I had him, and I had a long career in finance, kind of similar to you, and never really imagined I would do anything different. That was what I set out to do in college and did it for 30 years. But God had a different plan for us. So we figured out when Brady was 3 years old that he actually has autism and a little bit later ADHD. And it presented a very alternative parenting path for us. And it was one that I didn't fully embrace and accept as quickly as I probably should have. But it created a lot of challenges for us that I really struggled with. And over the course of several years, I was able actually to find God, to really dig into faith, to understand the purpose and how God makes each one of us and that he doesn't make mistakes. And as the years went on and I saw Brady grow and develop, he really started putting it on my heart to make a shift in my life. And so 2 years ago, he gave me this amazing opportunity to sell the practice that I had, and something I never even thought I would have the ability to do. But it gave me this margin and this space to really focus my time and attention on Kind Families, which is an acronym for kids with invisible neurological differences, like my son Brady. So for the last 2 years, I've been focused on Kind Families and writing a book to kind of encourage other families that are on similar paths, and have just been loving this complete 180 shift in my professional life that God gave me the opportunity to do.
I love that. And you and I were talking about how important it is that families have resources like this. And I know
Yeah.
you said you didn't really have it when you were at that stage. And I know I didn't. I have a son who's on the spectrum. So why don't we first start talking about what are the types of conditions that fall under the Kind umbrella as we kind of educate the families?
Well, so it's really anything where the person presents themselves as a typical person to anyone else. So no one else would be able to see that there are differences that are causing either different reactions, different responses, delayed responses. So, under the umbrella for in our world, initially it was autism and ADHD, but it could be dyslexia, it could be OCD, it could be sensory processing disorder. I actually had someone reach out to me on the Kind Families website recently, and her daughter suffered traumatic brain injury. And it was presenting very similar challenges for her daughter because she looked and spoke just like everybody else her age, but there were very different processes and neurodiverse activities going on in her brain that caused people to maybe not be able to interact with her in the same way that they might
Right.
with someone else.
Right.
So I'm finding it's interesting since the acronym came to me, I feel like God put that in my lap because there is way more than just the autism and ADHD. There are so many things out there now that qualify as a neurodiversity that, research shows that it might be 1 in 5 kids today have some kind of neurodiversity that I think would fall under that Kind umbrella.
That's so important to know that because as we're interacting with society and people out there, and teaching our kids to do that, right, is to be open and sensitive to and not judging someone just based on how they
Right.
look and how, something they do. And I love you told a story about being on a playground with Brady when he was young and something you saw and how it really impacted you and then later came back to you. So why don't you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's a kind of a painful one to recount because I was at a trampoline park. I live in Arizona, so when it's hot outside, you just try to find anything you can do in air conditioning. So we were at a trampoline park with my best friend and her daughters, and we were in one of the areas, and I looked up, and an older child had grabbed my friend's daughter and was banging her head up against the plexiglass. And of course, I went into full react mode, and I went over and I grabbed her, I pushed the kid away, and a man jumped up from the observation area and ran up and started just apologizing profusely, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. My son has Asperger's. And I had heard of Asperger's, maybe in TV shows or on the news or something like that. And it sounded like something really scary to me. And so my reaction to him was, well, then maybe you shouldn't have your kid playing around other kids. And I swept up my friend's daughter and I took her away. And, it was just so crazy that 2 weeks later, that is the exact diagnosis that I would come to the realization that my son had. And the first thing I thought about when it hit me after just the initial kind of, running into a brick wall type of shock was, oh my gosh, this is what that kid at the trampoline park had. And is my kid going to be like that? And then I thought about that father who was trying to give his kid a typical child experience in the summer in Arizona, and how defeated he must have felt. I still get emotional when I think about how I treated him because he was trying to do right by his kid and he tried to explain it. And me, instead of giving some grace and some understanding, I attacked him for it. And
well, I mean, you didn't know,
Yeah.
and that's part of why you're doing what you're doing, because it's
Right.
not just to educate the parents who have these children, but also everyone out there, especially as Christians, is to understand that. I love that the fact that you say that they're invisible differences, invisible
Right.
neurological differences, because that's what we need to be aware of. And I can imagine anyone would do the same thing because you were just being protective and
Right,
not
right.
understanding. So, but then I love how God showed you. It was such a short time later that you had the same thing happen, and it just made you reflect back and think, okay, well then it's gonna. I mean, I'm sure that's part of your journey
Oh, yeah.
because
Yeah.
you
And
want to do things differently.
honestly, I felt horrible and I felt shame initially right after Brady's diagnosis, but it took me several years to get God's perspective on that. God started really pulling at me to come close to him in this process, but it wasn't for several years. So thinking back on that episode, I approached it without any kind of God perspective at all at the
Right.
time. And
Right,
it was
right.
several years later of really learning about Jesus's relationship with us and how it can impact how we relate with others that I saw that episode in a very different light.
I bet you did. I bet you did. And so yes, that's beautiful. So you mentioned something about guilt and shame. And I want to talk about that because that is a big factor for parents of these neurologically different kids is we feel like, what did I do? What did, something that I didn't do right when I was pregnant? Or, I mean, back in the day, they used to think that autism was the mother's fault, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so we still kind of deal with some fallout from that, or ADHD or whatever it is. Why me? And what did I do? And what should I have done differently? And you talked about how you read John chapter 9 and God really showed you how to be free from that. So you want
Right.
to tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was really kind of at the beginning of my faith journey, too. So I had felt pulled into a Bible study. I had never done a Bible study before. I had never even thought about doing a Bible study before, which is ironic since I now lead a Bible study with like 80 women at my church. But it was very early in that first Bible study that I was doing where the homework was to read John 9, verses 1 through 3. And the crux of it, for those who aren't familiar, is Jesus is walking with his disciples and they see a blind man in the side of the road. And the disciples ask Jesus, Rabbi, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his sin or the sin of his parents? And man, that just hit me so hard because that was the first time I really felt it bubble up in me that's what I was feeling. I was feeling like I had done something horribly wrong, and this was my payback. That my son wasn't born as a typical child like had been my plan, and like all the other kids in his preschool class. But the next line was the one that really started my faith journey for me, and it was Jesus replying, "No. That is not why this man was born blind. He was born this way so that he could show the good works of God." It was like in that moment, I was able to step back and peel away all the challenges that we'd had with Brady and all of the things he was struggling with, which were very real and very scary in some circumstances. But then to see all these wonderful things about this child that God had given me too. He has an unbelievably creative brain. He is a feeler, kind of like your son. So he can feel when someone is feeling sad, and it impacts him. And he's got just a great heart. He's never been mean to anybody in his entire life. He wouldn't know how, and I started all of a sudden refocusing on the gifts that God had given Brady and all of the things that he had armed him with to be able to do God's good works in this world, and see that in the same light as, okay, he's got challenges that we definitely need to help him with. We can't ignore all the things that he struggles with, because we live in a world that isn't set up for people with his brain. So we have to help him with that, but we can never the impact that God has planned for him in this world with all of the gifts and talents that he does have. So it was the beginning of a real change in perspective for me that was so powerful.
And I love that you say that was the beginning of your God journey, because isn't that what God does? I mean, he puts these hard times in our life to draw us to him, and we can either turn to him or we can go our own way. And so you chose to turn to him, and that's so beautiful. Yeah. So obviously eventually you came to the Lord. Yeah. And so tell us about that.
I always say it wasn't a lightning bolt. I wish that all of a sudden everything, changed, but it was a long process of learning for me. And Bible study was absolutely critical for that. I learned things about Jesus and about the Bible. I was in a community with other women who loved Jesus and had long walks with him. And I heard their stories of faith and all the amazing things God had done in their lives. And slowly that really started to build that rock foundation for me. And little by little, I started leaning in with these little nudges that God would give me that I knew could only have come from him. I talk about in the book, I've always been like the closet karaoke girl, and knew I would never be a professional singer. I don't have that kind of talent, but he started nudging me at one point to join the worship team in my church that I was going to. And I thought that was nuts. I thought that was crazy. He wouldn't let go of it for me. And finally I said, okay, fine, God, I'll send this email to our worship pastor. And long story short, I've been on the worship team now for 6 years, and it's one of the most precious things that I do. I just feel so close to God when I'm doing it. And so in so many of these instances and selling my business, he's just continually growing my faith. And that doesn't mean that I don't question and that I don't need reminders to trust. And this year, I've had trust as my word for the year for, however many years. And when I started this year, I thought to myself, what's my word going to be? And I kind of went back to trust again. I'm like, I just don't get it. I just need to keep going back to that trust component with him. So it's a process, I think, for all of us.
Absolutely. And one of the things you talk about in the book that I just resonated with so much is the fact that you like to control things and you like to plan. You're a big planner. And it's interesting how God threw this huge thing at you that you didn't plan and you couldn't figure out a way around it. And you had to learn to depend on him. And that's what he showed you step by step by step, and just enough light for the step you were on.
Right. And he was so patient with me because it didn't happen right away. And I spent a couple, 2-3 years really denying the fact that I needed him in my life to be able to get through this event and this change in plan. But he just kept at it. He kept after me. And
So beautiful.
yeah, and
That's what he does.
he reached to Brady too, and that's another just beautiful thing that I see that is something I didn't think was possible before I had this relationship with God. I thought Brady's brain would be a roadblock to him ever being able to reach for something that was intangible and that was not black and white and that couldn't be held in his hand and, proved beyond the shadow of a doubt. But he did. He reached Brady too. So
I'm so glad. I know that's a great part of your book. And so you talked about how Brady struggles with anxiety and sadness, and that was a big thing to help him understand how to process those emotions. And I think, my son has the same. And I think some of the tips that you guys had, some of the tools that you used were so good. And so I would love for you to share some of that with our listeners.
Sure. Well, so when Brady was younger and it was very hard for him to share with us why he was sad, he would go from being happy and sitting on the couch to all of a sudden tears just streaming down his face. And so that was really hard because from a language perspective, he couldn't relay to us what had caused it. And I actually went to church one Sunday and there was a guest pastor who talked about Philippians 4. And it's the passage which John is writing from prison, that we have to keep in mind. And it's about changing the way that your brain is focused away from the challenges and the woe is me and the hard things to what is true, what is noble, what is excellent, what is praiseworthy. And I wanted to be able to relay that to Brady, but he was too young at the time to be able to, tell him a Bible verse and have him digest it. So I just took a piece of paper with that Bible verse on it. And for each descriptive, I had him tell me what his version of that was. So if it was true, he would say God. If it was noble, it was actually Dr. Melmed, his developmental pediatrician. He loved his developmental pediatrician. If it was excellent, it was Baby Yoda. If it was praiseworthy, it was brownies, but whatever it was, we put it onto just an 8.5 by 11 sheet and I tacked it up to his bulletin board in his room. And when we would come into those situations with him, I would just kind of move him in front of that board and I'd say, let's think about Dr. Melmed. Let's think about Baby Yoda. And, I will be honest, it didn't always flip a switch with him. But I think it helped create a habit with him of, okay, once I'm in this mode, I can focus on something else that will get me out of it. And now, he's a teenager. And so now he knows the music that he wants to go listen to that's going to help him, redirect his brain. It's no longer Baby Yoda. But I think God gave us these tools thousands of years ago to do, the very thing that all the self-help people are out there talking about today. But when we focus on all the blessings and the gratitude that we have in our lives, it can get us, away from being inward focused at our issues and keep us outward focused at the blessings that we do have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you were able to somehow get that across to Brady, and it took time. But that, we all need those tools, and the fact that he was able to grasp it and you were patient and you kept redirecting him and just that love and support from you guys. And that's so good. And I know God gave you that strength. So yeah.
I always say, I talk about Brady's gifts and talents, but I always remind other parents that he gave you gifts and talents too. And that child is your child because God knew that you had the ability to reach them and to do the right thing for them. Purpose isn't just in your child, it's in you too.
That's so good. People ask me a lot, how did you deal with it? And I would always just say, on my knees. Really, it was a daily thing. And, and sometimes still is, even though, he's all grown up. So, yeah. So, and then I know that you were able to instill his identity in Christ into Brady, and now he's a teenager, and I'm sure it's changed some. So how is all that playing out?
Well, we're in the phase of pick your battles, I think, with Brady as a teenager now. he has decided, along with all the other teenage boys, that he wants to grow his hair out and have it be all bushy and stuff. And I'm more of a clean cut fan. So, but that is a battle that I'm letting him win for the moment because, as I told my husband, he's not interviewing for a job as an investment banker or something like that. And that's what all the teenage kids are doing. But the more serious struggles come at this stage with other kids and with school environments. And Brady has not been immune to that. And we have actually had, believe it or not, had to leave a school where the kids were taunting him using autism as a taunt, like that's so autistic or something like that. The challenges that he is facing now make it more and more important to make sure he's rooted in Christ, in the fact that he was fearfully and wonderfully made. We talk about that a lot in our house, and that God doesn't make mistakes. Thankfully he will talk to me. Usually it's in, when I'm getting him into bed and I'm ready to go to sleep. That's when he will tell me what's going on. And unfortunately, I know a lot of kids that will not do that. And so I tell parents, even if your kid isn't saying something is going on or something is wrong, you have to be vigilant about reinforcing that Christ identity in them so that it can be that armor of love and peace that they can take with them in situations when you're not there. And,
and he's obviously feels safe enough that he can share all that with you, which in turn, you guys have developed a great relationship. And that just shows that, the neurological differences can't stop that from happening.
No.
And so that's a really important thing for parents to know, I think, to be encouraged that you can develop that relationship, that you can instill the identity in Christ, and you can have open conversations, and that he's able to take that and put in. Not, I'm sure some days are better than others, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
I never wanted anybody to take away from finding kind or kind families that there's some quick fix and that, you do one thing and all of a sudden life is easy and you don't have these challenges that come along with the kind type of diagnoses. But hopefully there's tools there that can help you deal with them in a way that reinforces their Christ identity and reinforces your ability to be a good parent to them and help them become the best person they can be.
Yeah. So. And I love how you said God chose you and he chose me and he chose others because he knows that with his help we can do it. So what are some of we're talking about the challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges you see kind families facing, especially if they're newly diagnosed? What would you say to them?
Well, finding community can be hard. And I wasn't able to do that until I was able to be more forthcoming about Brady's diagnoses. So, one of the things that I would really encourage parents to do is to be honest and to not try to hide behind what I called the cloak of invisibility and put on a face that everything is okay and that my child is just like every other child. Don't watch this hand over here, and I did that for so long, and it wasn't doing my son a service. It wasn't doing him a good thing to say that your condition is something that you should be ashamed of and not share with other people. So, obviously you have to be, and I tell him now, he has the ability to tell anybody he wants that he has autism. He's old enough, but I do encourage him. I'm like, get to know somebody before you make that determination, because some people are going to be as frightened about autism as I was when I first figured out that that's what you were. And but there are communities, there are online communities, there are Facebook groups. You're not alone. And there are, whether it's through connections with your child's therapist, I met a great group of moms through my son's occupational therapist. And we still get together 10 years later and we talk about our kids and the things they're going through. And even though every kid is different, there are strands of similarities that will help you understand that you're not alone.
Sure.
And then the other thing, someone gave me this piece of advice a while back, and I just think it made so much sense, that your child is the same the day before the diagnosis as the day after. They are the same child, and they are God's child, And God would not have given them to you and given them all the gifts and talents if he didn't have a purpose for them and for you in this world. And it's easy to get lost when you're in the beginning of that journey in all the therapies and all of the hours and all of the school meetings and the IEPs and just feel buried in it. And to almost replace the action of being a special needs mom with the fact that you are that kid's mom. So you've got to make sure that you are not letting it overtake the fact that you've got this amazing child, and this child will be able to touch other people's lives in a positive way, and that God put them there here to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about Brady's writing ability, his creative writing. And he's really been able to, and who knows what God's going to do that with that as he grows older and becomes an adult. So there's each one of these kids have, I mean, we all know that they're incredibly hyper focused on what they love and want to pay attention to. So
well, and it's also, you asked about the teenage thing. Like right now, we are really focused on trying to nurture those gifts and passions, because when he becomes an adult, those are the things that are going to give him a meaningful and productive life. He's not a sports kid, and we learned that very early on, and it was probably not going to be worth our time to force him into being on a soccer team or something like that. But we want to encourage the writing, and that he wants to be a film director, and he, so we really try to encourage that as much as we can, because that will lead him, if he starts building skills in those areas, to something that could maybe sustain him as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, I love that we all need to really understand what our kids' gifts and talents are and try to encourage them in that. And what has God, because God has given them these talents, right? And so instead of trying to turn them into what we want them to be, it's who does God want them to be?
Yes.
And you talk about identity in Christ. How is God going to use them? And when we can direct them that way, then they'll find contentment and happiness, right?
Right.
All kids.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. So you had a quote in the book where you said, I had placed all my joy in the successful execution of my plan instead of the author of my plan. And God found you in the broken pieces of your prideful plan, is what you said. So let's close by talking about why it so often does take a crisis to reveal the overwhelming goodness of God.
I think pride is the number one reason. I went to a Bible study once, and the author had said that pride is the biggest detractor from a relationship with God. And it goes all the way back to Genesis, to Adam and Eve wanting to be like God and taking the apple. And I think that was it for me. I thought I could take care of everything. I'd a pretty, challenge, I shouldn't say challenge-free life. Everybody has challenges, but I'd never had something that rocked me like this. And so up until that point, I kind of figured, I made this plan. The plan is executing. I'm good at this. I know what needs to be done. I know, the paths I need to take. And when I was challenged with Brady's condition, I tried to do it by myself. And all I did was run myself into the ground and wind up, crying at night and winding up in a mindset where I was saying, why me? And I think a lot of people, especially, I had Brady at an older age. I was almost 40, and I'd had a pretty successful career. And so I think it's maybe even harder for people who have kind of been able to check all these boxes for so long, to all of a sudden have a box that's uncheckable. And for me, it took a couple, 2-3 years to settle into the fact that I can't do this by myself. And so unfortunately, that was a pride check. That was me stepping back and saying, I didn't have the right to even set this plan in the first place. Who did I think I was? And there's a humbling process that allows God to finally reach your heart and say, that thing that's been missing all along, that was me. And I get emotional even thinking about it again. That was him. Yeah. And it was gone. He was missing my whole life. And I can look back so far, even beyond before I had Brady, in so many instances where he was with me and protecting me. But my pride was keeping me from letting that wall down and letting him reach my heart.
And he did what he needed to do, and he's bringing beauty from it and showing you all the goodness of the situation. And now you are passing that on to others. So so it's so good. So how can our listeners find out more about your book and Kind Families?
Yeah, so kindfamilies.com is the easiest place. You can go there and there's a link to the book there. And there's also some tools and resources and other blogs that I've written. The Kind Families podcast is also on Apple and Spotify, and you can listen to the last few episodes on the Kind Families website. And then I also encourage you to reach out through the website on the contact form. I respond to everybody that sends me a message there. So like I mentioned about the traumatic brain injury, adding that on to kind of a list of Kind came from a follower who came onto the Kind Families website and asked about it. So
that's so good.
I'd love to hear from you. And the book is available also on everywhere books are sold. So yeah.
Okay, good. And you talked about community and support, and I'm sure that all of that is you can direct people that way if they reach out to you, and you've got resources on your site. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and we'll put all that in the show notes. So
okay, great.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kari, for your honesty. It's a great book. You're vulnerable and authentic, and it's just really, and I just really enjoyed it. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me, Candace.
You bet. Take care.
You too.